hackers of the internet. But today we're not just speaking about hacking and hackers, we're speaking about identity and identity management. And I always like to think back to basics, like, why do we need identity management? What are we trying to do with identity management? Well, I guess one thing that we're trying to do is to keep different employees away from other employees' files if they're confidential, to divide rights of access to resources and documents and so on. But I guess even more importantly, we want to keep outsiders out, the evil outsiders out. And if we want to understand the attacks that we're seeing today, we have to understand our enemy. Because there is this misconception of the generic hacker who's trying to hack into organizations. And that's not actually the case, because different kind of organizations are being targeted by different kind of attackers who have different motives and who use different kinds of techniques to gain access to enterprise networks, which means you fight them with different kinds of tools. So let's pick an example of a company doing a threat assessment of their risk scenario. A company like a hotel chain. We're in a hotel right now. This is probably a chain of hotels. It's probably a mid-sized company. They might have a few hundred, maybe a few thousand employees. What is their risk scenario? Who would be interested in hacking them? Would it be foreign nation states interested to steal the recipes from the hotel restaurant? Probably not. Would it be hacktivist gangs trying to protest by showing their opinion by denial of servicing their website? Probably not. Might it be criminals interested in making money? Well, an organization like this has credit card information, payroll information, they do online banking, they have different kinds of financial transactions. Yes, definitely. An organization like this, a company like this, would have to worry about that kind of enemy in particular. But for a different company, the answer would be completely different. For a defense contractor, they would have to worry about foreign nation states. So we have to divide the enemy into different kinds of groups. And the basic split that I use is to split them into 5 different kinds of hackers. 5 different basic type of hackers. Hackers, number 1, guys like these. Guys in their sweatshirts and tracksuits. I actually know both of these guys. That's Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek. They're both hackers. But they are the good kind of hackers. These are the guys who hacked the Chrysler Jeep vehicle systems a year ago, who made the headlines world over. Why did they do that? To improve security of vehicles. Because when they found vulnerabilities from these cars, they told Chrysler and gave them 6 months of time to fix it, which Chrysler did. In the end, everybody benefited. So they are hackers, but they're not criminals. They're trying to improve security by hacking. Then group number 2, hacktivists or hacker activists. Now these guys, they do break the law, but they don't break the law for personal benefit. Typically they do it for some kind of a political motive or for a protest motive. Typical example would be the large-scale denial of service attacks that we saw targeting Bank of America a couple of years ago, when Bank of America stopped all wire transfers of donations to WikiLeaks. And that created a massive reaction from the anonymous collective, and they retaliated against Bank of America by launching large-scale attacks. Group number 3, criminals trying to steal money. And this is the biggest problem. We run a fairly large-scale virus lab, which receives on a typical day around 350,000 malware samples to be analyzed. We estimate that 95% of those samples come from group number 3. So criminals create clearly the largest amount of malware and different kinds of hacking attacks that we see. The rest of the groups divide the 5% among themselves. Group number 4 would be nation states. Nation states and governments. And we see offensive cyber action coming from various parts of the governments. We see law enforcement using malware to do criminal investigations. We see intelligence agencies do spying against foreign targets with offensive hacking or malware. And we see militaries all over, more and more interested in offensive use of computers. It sometimes feels like that we just got out of the last arms race, the Cold War and the nuclear arms race, and we jumped headalong to the next arms race, which is the cyber arms race. So that's groups 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're left with the last group, and this is an emerging group. This is extremists. Extremists and terrorist groups. Now, we haven't yet seen an example of a cyber terror attack, but especially Islamic State is clearly aiming to do something like that. And they've been fairly successful in recruiting skills from the West, from different parts of Europe and also from the United States, who they've managed to join their cause and to start hacking for them. In fact, we've now seen already 2 cases where United States military has tried restricting this problem or stopping this problem from becoming any bigger by launching targeted drone strikes to kill hackers. This has happened twice. First in August last year, second time in December last year. And just a sentence, US Army did a drone strike to kill a hacker. That sounds like something you would read from a science fiction book, but it has happened twice now already, which is an example of just how seriously US takes this risk and wants to nip it in the bud before it gets any bigger. But as you can see, we have quite different groups of hackers. And not all organizations have to worry about all of them. And also, like I mentioned, criminals, the money-making criminals, the ones who try to steal money, are the biggest problem. Because they target pretty much anybody, any organization, even private citizens. Of course, if you become a target of a foreign nation state or a foreign intelligence agency, that can be very, very serious, but most organizations are not targeted by foreign nation states. So, let's take some examples of organized crime groups or people running organized crime groups. Here's 3. On the left, Mr. Denis Kalovskis from St. Petersburg in Russia, who was the brains behind the GOZI operation, which was a very large-scale botnet which was used for various different purposes, mostly to steal money by collecting credit card numbers. Credit card numbers which were collected with a keylogger, so people would lose their corporate credit card number or their private credit card number as they were doing online shopping on an infected computer, as they were typing in their name, the address, the credit card number, expiration date, the security code. All that was saved, stored, and sent to Dennis and his gang. In the center we have Viljar Kivi, Estonian, who was running large-scale phishing attacks. And then on the right we have Yevgeny Bogachev. And unlike Dennis and Viljar, who have been caught and who are actually both right now in jail, Yevgeny hasn't been caught. He's originally from Moscow area. We believe he's now in Dubai or Abu Dhabi. He's actually on the wanted lists of both Interpol and Europol. And I guess he's on the wanted list for, computer crimes and also probably for crimes against fashion. He's the guy who was running the Zeus gang. Zeus was a banking Trojan. The banking Trojans are the kinds of malware which will infect your system and then they do nothing until you start doing online banking. So once your system gets infected, the Trojan might sit dormant for a month doing nothing at all. But then one day you remember you have to pay your bills, and you go to your infected computer and you log into your online bank to pay 4 bills, and Zeus inserts a 5th bill, which you never see. It's not visible on your screen, but it is in there, and you will send it to your bank, and your bank will believe it came from you. That's how Zeus stole money from online banks. And groups, like the groups run by these 3 individuals, operate online. Most of their business transactions are done with other criminal groups. And most of these are done in the dark web, in the Tor hidden service, outside of our view, on sites that you can't find with Google. But some gangs also operate out in the open, especially the gangs which are advertising denial of service attacks. Because any site can be taken down with a denial of service attack. Denial of service attacks are blunt attacks. They generate so much traffic that the service cannot keep up. Typically the service which is taken down is a website. It can be an email server or an application server, but typically we're speaking about websites. And some of these gangs that provide these services actually advertise these attacks on YouTube. So let me play you one ad from one gang. To be clear, this is not an endorsement. I'm not telling you to go and buy an attack from that site, because that would actually be illegal. But this is how they advertise, this is how it works. So you don't actually need any skills to launch a simple attack like denial of service attack. Interestingly, we saw the largest denial of service attack in the history of the internet 2 weeks ago. That particular attack was targeting a blog, a single blog run in the United States by a friend of mine, by a guy called Brian Krebs. Why was he targeted? He was targeted because he did an expose on one of these groups, not this group. He did an expose on a group called Vidos, which is selling denial of service attacks. So he was silenced by taking down his site with a massive attack, the largest we've seen in the history of the internet. It was so large that his hosting provider kicked him out, because the attack was costing the hosting provider around $100,000 a day. So they kicked him out. And that particular attack, which was done with a botnet consisting of millions of systems, was not built out of hacked computers. That botnet was built out of hacked smart televisions, out of hacked security cameras, out of hacked set-top boxes and routers. So we're speaking about a botnet made out of the Internet of Things. This is one of the things which is changing around us very quickly. Another problem that we keep running into over and over again are the problems of these massive leaks and data breaches. Now, LinkedIn was already mentioned earlier today, and that's a good example of millions of users having their email address and the connected password made public. And this was nicely illustrated by the fact that one of the persons who lost his email address and LinkedIn password in the 2012 LinkedIn breach was Mark Zuckerberg. How do we know this? Well, we know this because this 2012 breach was made public this summer in June. And 3 days later, someone tried Mark Zuckerberg's email address and the same password that he had on LinkedIn to his account on Twitter and a couple of other social media sites, and he had the same password. So Mark Zuckerberg had his social media taken over, not his Facebook account, because that would have been nice, but his Twitter and rest of it taken over by an unknown attacker. We also know what his password on LinkedIn and Twitter was, because this was made public in June. His password was da-da-da. D-A-D-A-D-A. That's it. That's not a very good password. And it's not a very good idea to recycle the same password on different sites. And we all know this. We all work with identity management. But we also know that people do that. And you know what? I was part of this breach. Because I made a LinkedIn account in 2009. And 3 years later, somebody stole it. Stole my email address that I used on LinkedIn and my password, which I didn't use anywhere else, but of course I wouldn't, because I'm trying to follow my own instructions. So how do I know I was breached? Because I got an email, this email. You're one of the 164 million people pwned in the LinkedIn data breach. You have been pwned. This is a service run by a friend of mine, a guy called Troy Hunt from Australia. It's a service where you can register your email addresses, like your work email and your private email, and then if that email is ever made public in any data breach, Troy will send you an email. He will notify you. And this service is, well, I recommend this service. Many people ask me that, can you trust that? Yes, you actually can. I know how it's run. It's run very, very securely, and it's a good service to give you an early notification of a breach. So for example, if you were part of the Yahoo breach, you would have received an email from Have I Been Pwned a couple of weeks ago. The URL is hard, haveibeenpwned.com, but if you just Google for Have I Been anything, Google will find it for you. So passwords continue to be a problem, which is sort of disheartening. We are in 2016, and passwords continue to be a problem. How come we haven't already gotten rid of the passwords? I mean, we've been fighting them for so many years, and all the advice people are given, for example, in newspaper stories about good password practices, are wrong. All of the advice is wrong, because it's always the same advice. It's always the advice of choose a very long and random password with upper and lower case and numbers and punctuation, and make it different for every site. And don't write them down. Like, what? Like, how do you actually do that? How are you supposed to do that? I mean, those advices actually made perfect sense in 1985, when you had like 3 different mainframes you had to log on. They don't work in 2016, because every single one of us has more than 100 different accounts. Just the accounts in our office. Typically, you could have 10 different accounts for different systems. Hopefully not, but it's the reality. And then you have all the different newspapers and forums and social media. It's a mess. Passwords are a mess. And you don't have to take that from me. You can actually take that from the President of the United States.
More companies are moving to much stronger technologies to authenticate user identities, like biometrics. Because it's just too easy for hackers to figure out user names and passwords, like password. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. Those are some of my favorite sentences. I've changed them since then.
Because basically we can divide all the security problems we have into 2 different groups. Group number 1, technical problems, like vulnerabilities in the systems, which we fix by fixing the vulnerabilities. And vulnerabilities are nothing but bugs. I mean, if there's bugs in the code and the code is on a network, that's going to be a vulnerability. So we fix them by fixing the bugs and then distributing the updates to all the users. That's group number 1. But then we have group number 2. And group number 2 is users. Users doing stupid stuff. And we can't fix users. We can't patch people, can we? And users will do stupid stuff. They will do stupid stuff like, I don't know, taking a photo of their new credit card and posting the photo on Twitter. And then, when somebody asks her, hey, that's a nice card, but what's the number on the other side? She actually replies. I quit. Can't fix that. There's no patch for that. Now, we are seeing some improvements in user authentication. For example, finally, after, I don't know, 15 years of trying, fingerprint readers work. They actually are effective. They work and they give you the kind of benefits that we didn't have before. One of the interesting side effects of the fact that fingerprint readers are now so commonplace on our smartphones is that people lock their phones more. And they set it so that it locks automatically every time you just put it to sleep, and it requires your finger to wake up, which is great for the chance that your phone is stolen. Because if your phone is stolen, the thief, they can only use it for parts, because they can't get it open, because they don't have your finger. But of course, thieves are clever. So what we're seeing now are attacks where your iPhone gets stolen. You're desperate because you just lost your iPhone. No, you get a new phone. And then 2 days later, you get a strike of luck because you get a notification from Find My iPhone. The stolen phone has been found. Excellent. You can get it back. So you follow the link and you log into a service. And I suppose you're knowing where this is going. It looks very real, doesn't it? But iCloud.report domain is not owned by Apple. And it actually redirects you to find.myiphone.help, which is not owned by Apple either, but it sure looks real. And you can imagine yourself, you're so happy that your stolen phone has been found that you're not really thinking through as you put in your iCloud credentials. And now that the thief who stole your phone has your iCloud credentials, they can reset your phone. They can get access to your phone, even though it had the fingerprint reader. Our job would be so much easier if the attackers would be stupid. But they aren't stupid. These are clever attacks. They think through on how to work the system. These particular attackers, they've been running these cases for at least a year now, where phones are stolen. Or actually, we believe this gang buys the stolen phones, which the thief can't unlock, and they can unlock it with this technique. And they've actually been running a whole series of different domain names where they actually host these iCloud phishing sites. For example, these domain names. Interestingly, almost all of them use these new top-level domains like .review, .trade, .science, and of course my favorite, number 2, apple.findiphone.sexy. So domain names continue to be part of the problem as well, because many of the phishing scams fool the user with misleading links going to misleading domain names. Like you get a worrying email about your Gmail account, how someone from Florida has been logging into your account. Well, that's worrying. Check your account. And you follow the link. And you end up to the Google authentication page, which looks awfully real, but googledocs.info isn't actually an official domain by Google. Or you get a notification from PayPal and you follow it. And you go to PayPal site. And the URL, well, actually the URL fills the whole address bar. But it looks fairly convincing because it does start with paypal.com. But that's not the domain name. The domain keeps on going until it finally reaches something in Brazil. This site is actually in Brazil. This is not PayPal. But you can easily see why users make these mistakes. We've built our system so that we're sort of like geared for failure. Users will fall for these. Just like they will fall for this. Hello, your credit card has been charged for $802. Thank you for shopping with us. And you haven't been shopping. So this is worrying. The first impression is that somebody has stolen my credit card. Which of course means that big part of the users receiving this email will click on the attached invoice to see what was purchased. But when they open up the Word document, they cannot read the document. The content is just garbage. But then there's this helpful message on top which says that if the document has incorrect encoding, please click the Enable Content button. And when you click the button, it actually works. It then somehow descrambles the invoice, and now you can read the invoice, but now it's already too late. Because your card has not been charged. It hasn't been stolen. What they really wanted you to do was to click on that button, to click on the Enable Content button. And this is the button you should never click on. Never. Because this is the button which executes the macros, basically executes the programs inside that Word document or Excel spreadsheet or PowerPoint file. This is the document which was introduced by Microsoft in Office 97 in 1997, 19 years ago. Because you might remember mid-1990s malware outbreaks like I Love You and Melissa, which went around the world in macroviruses, in Word documents. And it became so bad that Microsoft decided that in the next release of Office, they're going to kill the whole feature. They're going to remove the feature. They're going to disable macros by default, because it turns out that 99% of Office users were not using macros, and the 1% which was using macros was using them to write viruses. So they disabled it 19 years ago. And the way they disabled it 19 years ago was that if you open up a document which has macros, they will show you this button for the off chance that you might want to run them anyway. So never click on Enable Content. There are similar buttons in Word and Excel. For example, Enable Editing, which is what you see when you download a document from the web. That's kind of okay. That's not going to run anything. But Enable Content actually runs, well, in this case, runs a script which creates an exe file, drops it on your hard drive, and runs it. The piece of malware that these kinds of macro attacks are using have become really, really commonplace. And some of the tricks they use are really good. So for example, you get a document like this. You can't open it because it's been made with a newer version of Word. You get this from your boss. And turns out your boss already has Word 2016, and you don't. You're still running 2013 or Office 365 or something. This document was edited in a newer version of Microsoft Office. To correctly load the document, please click Enable Content. Don't click Enable Content. It wasn't sent by your boss. There is no Word 2016. It just looks very convincing because it wants you to click the button. So if you would click the button, what would happen? Well, with this particular file, the macro would take a binary blob from inside the document, create a new file in your temporary folder, write the blob there, rename it to temp1.exe, and then execute it. Which means it's now executing under your rights. It's executing with the same level of privileges as you have. And in most systems, in most organizations, that means, hopefully, fairly low-level privileges. You're not the admin. You won't be able to, for example, install new applications which would survive a reboot or things like that. However, for the particular attack that this Trojan is doing, they don't require any further rights than what you have already by yourself, because this drops a ransom Trojan. Ransom Trojan, you know, the kinds of Trojans which will encrypt your documents and then ask for a ransom from you to get your documents back. So they're not interested in accessing your system folder. They're interested in accessing your documents. And of course, you can access your documents with your own privileges. Not just the documents on your laptop, but the documents in your network, the documents in your cloud. And this is what Ransom Trojans do. They mount every single share that they can see in your enterprise network. They will go through every single document that you have the right to write to, and they will encrypt them. So it's not just your computer that gets encrypted, it's the network. And then they will ask for a ransom. This is DMA Locker. DMA Locker actually has what we call dynamic pricing, which means it's going to ask you different sized ransoms depending on how large your organization is. And it's measuring the size of your organization by the number of your shares. So how many network servers you have, how many shares you have, how many cloud shares you have, how many SharePoint shares you have. So if you're a home user who only has Dropbox and maybe a home server, it's going to ask for 4 Bitcoin, which is around 2,500 euros. If you have 70 shares, it knows you're an enterprise, and it's going to ask you for thousands of Bitcoins. It's dynamic pricing, which is a good example on how these guys are businessmen. Ransom Trojan gangs are run as companies. They think about things like return on investment. They think about things like how to find fresh customers or victims. They think about things like how to reach customers in new regions. For example, this is HydroCrypt. HydroCrypt has been localized to 27 different languages, including Finnish. There's only 5 million Finns, yet it's been localized to Finland, Finnish language, so they can target victims in Finland, even those who don't speak English. And they also have to think about competition, because we are right now tracking over 110 different Ransom Trojan gangs. And by the way, not all of these Ransom Trojan gangs are from Russia. Some of them are from Ukraine. And the businessmen running these operations have even gone to new business models like Ransom Trojan Franchises. This is Ransom Trojan as a service. Ransom Trojan run with revenue share. The Shark ransomware project means that these guys write the actual Trojan, but they don't infect anybody with it because that's illegal and risky. So they just provide it as a service to other criminals who then do the dirty work of actually infecting users. And then they do a revenue share out of the ransom that they collect. And the megatrend that made all of this possible, the megatrend behind all of it, is Bitcoin. And of course, Bitcoin isn't really the problem. It's just the trend behind it, because Bitcoin isn't good or bad, it's a tool. Just like real-world cash isn't good or bad, it's a tool. We all use real-world cash. But you know who really loves real-world cash? Criminals do. Most of the real-world crime is done with cash. Most of the real-world drug trade is done with cash. It's kind of hard to buy cocaine with a credit card, or so I've been told. Exactly in the same sense, it's kind of hard to buy cocaine online with a credit card. And you use Bitcoin instead, because Bitcoin is the online equivalent of cash. Tomorrow, Graham Cluley will speak to you more about the latest developments in ransom Trojans and how this problem is probably going to continue to haunt us for the upcoming years. And then there's another problem we have to think about, which is the fact that governments are more and more active on the internet, using offensive force on the internet. The very first governmental malware that I ever analyzed was in 2003, 13 years ago. And that piece of malware was targeting a European defense contractor with targeted attacks, trying to steal their future plans for the future weapons development systems. And that particular attack in 2003, the first case I ever analyzed, which we linked to a government, was coming from these guys. It was coming from PLA, coming from the Chinese. But since then, we've seen offensive cyber action from dozens of different governments. From the Chinese, from the Russians, from the United States, from Iran, from North Korea, you name it. And right now, one of the strong developments in this field is what's happening regarding attacks originating from the Russian government trying to affect the outcome of the US presidential elections. We've seen the massive leaks from Secretary Clinton's personal email server, leaks from the hacked Democratic National Convention server. But not only that, there's also been confirmed hacking attacks against 20 different election systems in 20 different states in the United States, of which 4 were confirmed breaches. So it's not just leaking information, it's also trying to gain access to the systems that are used to elect the next president of the United States. So what is Russia trying to do here? Or is it Russia? Well, it is Russia. We have investigated some of these cases and we can link them back to attacks that we have attributed to the Russian government already years ago. I do believe it is the Russian government. What's the end game? What are they trying to do? I don't believe that they are trying to get Trump elected. I don't think that's the end game. What I think is the end game for the Russian government is just to make United States weaker. Make USA weaker as a country. And what I think they're trying to do here is that in a month from now, when the elections are over and we have a winner, regardless of who wins, the losing candidate and his or her supporters will be left with the feeling that the other party won because of some kind of cheating or because of some kind of hacking, that it wasn't fair. And if like half of the nation believes that the elected leader shouldn't be there to begin with, that creates a country which is very hard to lead, making United States weaker. And that's what I think is the end game for Russia here. Another example of what Russia has been doing lately is that you all remember the investigation to the tragic crash of the Malaysian Airlines MH17, which was shut down above Ukraine a little over a year ago. The investigators, while they were investigating this case, trying to figure out who did it, those investigators working for the Dutch government, they were targeted with phishing attacks, spear phishing attacks, misleading, trying to make them log into a Outlook web access point, which looked just like the one they were using to share information for their research, except it wasn't the real thing. And this attack was also linked back to the Russian government. Then you might have heard about the attacks this year targeting the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, or probably better known with the abbreviation, which is SWIFT. This attack was remarkable because there were multiple different banks being targeted. The interesting thing here is that SWIFT wasn't being targeted. SWIFT is a company headquartered in Brussels. They were not being targeted. What was being targeted were banks which were using the SWIFT network to do international transactions. And the attacker tried stealing close to $1 billion, billion with a B. They succeeded stealing close to $100 million. So we're speaking about significant amount of money here, which leaves us with 2 questions. Question number 1, who did it? Question number 2, where did the money go? Well, we know where the money went. The money went here. This is a casino in Philippines. With the first breach, little over $60 million was wired into this casino and converted into poker chips. Talk about a high roller when you have $60 million in poker chips. Why? Well, if you think about different casino games, if you're playing roulette or blackjack and you lose, the money goes to the casino. But if you play poker and you lose, the money goes to your opponent sitting across you on the table. So what they were doing here was laundering the money by going and playing poker with it and losing it on purpose to your partner in crime. We've seen this before. Both online casinos and real-world casinos are used to launder money stolen from different kinds of financial systems. And we also have an idea who did it, because there's one clue in the code used in these attacks. As the banks that were hacked were being remotely controlled, the control and command channel over the internet was encrypted with an encryption key, this key. And we've seen this key before. We've seen it before exactly once. We saw this key in December 2014. We saw it in an attack which was targeting a movie studio. We saw this very same encryption key to encrypt the command and control functions in the attack used to target Sony Pictures. And Sony Pictures was being targeted because of the movie they were about to release. A movie which paints a picture of the North Korean dictator, and in which in the movie he actually dies. Sorry for spoiling the movie if you haven't seen it, but he dies. As this happened, US government put out a public statement saying that this was done by North Korea. And we were having a hard time accepting that. How would you possibly know it's North Korea? Until we then learned 2 weeks later that they knew, because US intelligence had hacked into North Korean systems 2 years earlier, and they were watching them do it. So is this cyberwar? No, that's theft. The annual North Korean budget for the whole country is around $4 billion. So if they tried stealing $1 billion, well, that's sort of like fixing your budget deficit by stealing from the rest of the world. But what's closer to cyberwar are the kind of attacks that we saw little less than a year ago, targeting a company called Prykarpato Oblenergo, which is a company headquartered in Kyiv, which is a company handling the long-distance electricity grid for most of Ukraine. Because they were hit with an attack which was targeting the operators in their headquarters, the operators who operate the grid, people sitting on their workstations on which they control the backup power generators and the relays controlling the grid. And on 23rd of December last year, around 2 p.m. in the afternoon, one of the operators realized that his mouse doesn't work. This is how it starts. One of the operators realizes that his mouse doesn't work, probably out of battery, right? Then he realizes that the keyboard doesn't work either, so he turns to his colleague, and his colleague tells him the same story, that yeah, my mouse doesn't work. But funnily enough, even though my mouse doesn't work, the cursor is still moving on the screen. And this is a bad sign. The end result of the attack was that the shadow operator took over the power grid control panel and shut down power from over 200,000 citizens, including shutting power to the building where the operators were themselves, leaving the operators in the dark. And this attack came from Russia. And Russia and Ukraine are at war. So what else could we call this except an attack in cyberwar? Now, the power didn't stay out forever. In fact, it was recovered for most of the users during the same day. But the operators could not recover the power through computer systems because the attacker had overwritten the firmware on the serial to Ethernet converters, basically turning them into bricks, meaning that they couldn't control it remotely. So the only way to get the power back is to physically go to the relays and turn the power back on manually by hand. And we also know how this attack started. This attack had already started 2 months earlier in October, when one of the operators received an email with an Excel spreadsheet which had text in Ukrainian, which instructed him to click the Enable Content button. Don't click the button. Thank you very much.